Hello everyone, I'm Heath, and in this video I want to go into kind of a statistical breakdown of the math behind the d20 and some other variations that we could use, because I have really been enjoying the comments that people have been putting onto the video where I talked about whether or not we should still be using the d20 in Dungeons & Dragons because of the tremendous variability that it provides, 1 to 20, all numbers equally probable, in relation to the modifiers, which can be rather modest at times, that are applied to the d20. I have really been enjoying the comments. People have had a tremendous amount of great insight into what's going on, and I have really enjoyed reading everything that everyone has said. But what I want to do is I want to take the argument a little bit further here. So one thing that is important in this consideration is what are reasonable modifiers at different levels. Because people in the comment section have been discussing that, and they've been saying that, hey, even at, I don't exactly remember, this isn't an exact quote, but even at low levels, third level, or whatever, something like that, I can have +9 or +12 or something to some particular kind of check because of how well I've created this character. I can get that. And okay, I mean, that's reasonable. I do not consider myself any type of power player or min-max player or anything like that. I just create characters. So here I am in my Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, D&D Beyond here, where I've got 3 characters that I am currently playing. And I've got Nethris, a 4th level Damphir wizard, who is a necromancer. I've got Ilaris, a 6th level Iasamar cleric. And I've got Holgar, a 4th level fighter champion, who is a hill dwarf. And if we take a look at them, here is Nethris, and under attack here I've got Chill Touch, Melf's Acid Arrow, all at +6. Those kinds of modifiers. I've got a +5 with my dagger, +6 with a lot of my spells. He is level 4. Ilaris here, which is level 6. He's got a +5 with his light crossbow, but most of the time he uses a warhammer, which is +6, but then guiding bolt +6, inflict wounds +6. And then over here with Holgar, I've got a great axe here at +4, hand axe +4, unarmed strike +4. So as far as what modifiers I have, someplace between 4 and 6. So this is roughly on average level 5, I'm saying, which is 25% of the way through the game. I mean, lots of people play, first through 5th level, 6th level, through 8th level, things like that. So these characters are reasonably advanced. And basically, +4, +5, +6, that's the kind of modifier I've got when I'm doing something. So that's why, for these examples, I'm going to be using +5 as a modifier. And we're going to go from there. All right. So here, for example, I am taking a look at what it means when you're rolling a d20, like you are in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and you're taking a +5 modifier, which seems something reasonable for you to have when you're 4th through 6th level, as my characters are, something like a +5 modifier to whatever you're trying to do, whether that's some kind of skill check, or ability check rather, or whether it's to make some kind of successful attack. Now in this case, to follow up directly on one of the examples in the previous video, let's say that I'm trying to accomplish a DC 18 task. So I've got 1 through 20 right here, and that means that if my difficulty class is 18, that means that if I roll an 18, 19, or 20, I am able to succeed regardless of what my modifier was. If my modifier was only +2, and I am trying to do some kind of DC 18 task or attack an armor class 18 creature, it doesn't matter what my modifier is if I roll an 18, 19, or 20. That's a 15% chance, right? So in this case, though, I am saying that I've got a +5 modifier. That means that I will succeed on 13, 14, 15, 16, or 17. That means that I will succeed with my modifier. These are the successes where it doesn't matter what my modifier was. These are the successes where it did matter what my modifier was. And then here are my failures where it also doesn't matter what my modifier was. I will fail those regardless of my +5 modifier. So in this case, what does this mean? This means that in all of, this right here to this right here, and this to this, those are the ranges where at +5, it does not matter what my modifier is. If I roll in those ranges, the dice have determined that I either fail or succeed. Okay, and that means that 75% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die, right? With a +5, trying to accomplish a DC 18 task, 75% of the time the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die. It's only when I roll in this range right here, 25% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the character. That's when the skill, ability score, proficiency score, and yes, magic items, whatever else, that's when your modifier is actually mattering. Now, of course, it does mean that I will succeed more than 15% of the time, because that means that my total chance of success is 40%. But it still means that 75% of the time, the success or failure of the task was determined by the roll of the die. And if you are like me in your gaming philosophy and the kind of thing that I'm thinking of in terms of, what direction I'm wanting to go, I'm tending to think that's too much. DC 18, okay, plus 5 modifier, that's someplace around level 5 of the characters that I'm playing. That means that when I'm trying to accomplish a DC 18 task, 75% of the time, I am in the hands of the dice. And only 25% of the time is something that I'm controlling on my character sheet, determinative of whether we've got success or failure. Now, as was pointed out to me in the comment section when I was talking about the D20, and this is very important, they were saying that, well, DC 18, if you're trying to think of that as an armor class, because we could be, in this case, for attacks and things like that, that if the Game Master is routinely trying to send armor class 18 foes against level 5 heroes, they're just trying, that Game Master is just trying to kill you. And so it's not reasonable to expect that I should be facing armor class or DC 18 tasks or armor class 18 monsters or whatever. Okay then, I mean, that's a legitimate concern, so let's look at another situation. Let's say, in this case right here, we are rolling a d20, as we do in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. We have a plus 5 modifier as last time, but this time we only have a difficulty class of 15. So how does that change things? Well, you might be surprised, or you might not, depending on how much you've thought about this, that there isn't much change to the overall statistics. We're trying to see what percent of the time the dice are in control of our fate, and what percent of the time we are in control of our fate. What percentage of the time do the dice determine that we have succeeded or failed? Well, oddly enough, let's say here, if we roll, we're DC 15, so if we roll a 1 through a 9, we have failed without modification. It doesn't matter. Our plus 5 modifier doesn't matter. And if we roll a 15 through a 20, our modifier also doesn't matter because that means that we succeed. That means that 75% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die. So if we roll a 14, 13, 12, 11, or 10, that means that we are go, and that means that 25% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the player. That does mean that our total chance of success is 55%. So let's compare and contrast these two things. Here, our total chance of success is 55%. Here, our total chance of success is 40%. So we have indeed gained a 15% chance of success if the Game Master decided to move from a difficulty class 18 task to a difficulty 15 task. So we have gotten that overall, right? But notice what we haven't changed. We haven't actually changed the influence of the dice. The dice, in both cases, here at DC 18, still account for 75% of the successes or failures. Over here at DC 15, 75% of the successes or failures. At plus 5 modifier, and this might not surprise those who have actually been looking at these numbers, still 25% of the time, the decisive factor has been the skill of the character. So this is why I say yes, you can definitely adjust the percentage chance that you're going to have successes or failures at the table by increasing or decreasing the difficulty class. And of course, as the Game Master, that's something you should be doing, deciding what the difficulty class of the different tasks are, which does include AC for monsters, are for the characters that you have at the table based on their level. But what isn't under your control when you are deciding DCs is the amount of influence the dice have versus the skill of the characters. Because in this case, as we can see, 75% of the time, in both cases, the decisive factor is the dice, not the modifier the character is bringing to the table. So according to my philosophy here of game design, this is too much. This is too much reliance on the variability of the dice and not enough reliance on the skill, whether that's proficiency bonus or ability modifier or whatever, or even magic item bonus. Whatever modifier that character is bringing to the table. See, I think that's too much. Let's go down here and take a look at a +10 modifier, because some people are saying, well, you looked at only +6 proficiency modifier, but you've got to add in your ability score modifier to that, and you can also have magic items and things like that. So, really, by the time you're rocking and rolling, you're going to getting +10 modifiers, +9, +8, +10, all the way up to +12. Okay, fine, definitely, we should look at that. So let's say you are rolling, this should be rolling a d20, and you've got a +10 modifier, and you are trying to accomplish a DC 15 task, which is, our moderate level task. Well, what's going on here? Well, if you roll a 1 through a 4, you are failing, and that doesn't depend on your modifier. And if you roll a 15 through 20, that also does not depend on your modifier, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 numbers. Each number has a 5% chance of appearing. That means that 50% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die. And that might surprise some people. You've got a +10 modifier, and yet still 50% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die when you are rolling a relatively moderate DC 15 task. Yep, that's absolutely true. That means that here, if you roll a 5 through a 14, okay, that means that you have succeeded. And why did you succeed? Because of some kind of modifier the character brought to the table, which means that 50% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the character. That's a coin flip. That's a coin flip. To me, that sounds too random, especially when you talk about somebody with a +10 modifier, because it seems like intuitively, if you're talking about, wow, a +10 modifier to the die, that is somebody who's really in charge of their own destiny. But really, it's not. That's the coin flip, whether or not your modifier even matters at all. Now, that gets muddled because the total chance of success is 80%, because as long as you roll at least a 5, you have succeeded, right? And so a lot of people will focus on that and go, hey, listen, DC 15 tasks, by the time you've got a +10 modifier, that's an 80% chance of success. That's pretty easy. Only 20% of the time you're going to miss. You should be rocking and rolling on DC 15 tests by the time you have a +10 modifier. And I agree that it definitely seems like you should, but still it's only 50-50 as to whether or not that +10 modifier has even mattered at all because of the extreme variability of this d20 that we're rolling. Let's take a look at another example here, and this is rolling a d20 with a +10 modifier, but this time we're going to boost this to a DC of 20, because by the time you're getting like a +10 bonus to your roll, you're thinking, well, you shouldn't just be doing DC 15 tasks. The DC of your task should also increase, so we're going to have that going up as well. So it seems pretty reasonable to assume that at times when you've got something like a +10 modifier to your roll, you're going to be trying to accomplish DC 20 tasks. But what does that change? Well, let's find out. If your target number is 20, if you roll a 20, as well as rolling a 1 all the way through a 9, if you roll any of those, guess what? 50% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the dice. And to some people, that will seem crazy. If you roll a 10 through a 19, that's when your modifier actually mattered. But what percentage of the time is that? 50% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the player. And in this case, the total chance of success is 55%. It's a little bit better than a coin flip in favor of the player, because 11 through 20 would be 50-50, right? 1 through 10 is on the low end, 11 through 20 is through the high end. So this is a little bit in the favor of the player, but basically, rolling a d20 with a +10 modifier is a coin flip of success or failure, and it's also a coin flip as to whether or not the modifier, the skill that the character has brought to the table, has mattered. And by the time you are getting +10s in the game, outside of some extreme builds, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, a 5th level character getting about +5, you go further. By the time you're getting reliable +10 modifiers to your rolls, you would generally think that you're beyond a coin flip. I mean, that would be the intuitive thing that I would think, but it's not the case. This is why Dungeons & Dragons has always been, and in this case we're specifically looking at 5th edition, has always been a very random game. And of course some people in the comments have said, exactly, it's a very random game. If you're not happy with that, go play something else. Okay, I understand. But, you know, we can try to improve things too, and if we can't improve them, we can go and create our own thing as well. So this right here is rolling a d20 with a +10 modifier, but moving things up to a DC 25. So this is also interesting because this is when things start to rely more on the skill of the player, because we've moved the DC beyond what can be naturally rolled on the d20. You can't roll a 25. You can't roll a natural 25. So there's no way to succeed just naturally. So failure without the modification, you roll a 1 to 14, man, you are out of your zone. The dice have determined that you failed. If you roll between a 15 and a 20, then you have succeeded, but you have only succeeded because of your modifier. That means that 70% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the roll of the die. In this case, it was all determinative to be a failure. 30% of the time, the success or failure of the task is determined by the skill of the player, and the total chance of success is 30%. Now, in some respects, I have less of a problem with this because we're moving up to 25 DC, which is, very hard or something like that. Obviously, we're moving beyond what is even possible in the D20 range of variability, so you'd expect that only very skilled characters would be able to accomplish that. And they can only accomplish that with a +10 modifier 30% of the time, right? So anytime they were able to accomplish that task, it was because of their skill, the modifier they're bringing to the table. So, I'm okay with that because I'm like, okay, success then depends on the skill of the character, even though the success rate is only 30%. I think I've probably gone on long enough right now, but in the next video, I want to take a look at how these numbers change when you move to a D10 system and also other systems beyond D10, talking about D8s, D6s. I want to look at that to see if we can get to some kind of better system where the character's skill matters more. So we'll take a look at that in the next video. Let me know what you think down in the comments. If I missed something, let me know. Talk to me in the comments. I love hearing from you. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and all of that jazz. It really helps a lot. But also, please check out The Cultists, the web series on this channel about modern-day D&D playing Lovecraftian cultists who just want to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who just don't understand. Season 1 is on the channel now. But also, please check out my YouTube channel. I have over 150 videos on tabletop games and the fantasy genre. If you've enjoyed this video, you might enjoy many of them as well. I look forward to seeing you for them and many more videos to come.